So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. You might have noticed when you entered that we do have a recording running for today. So, as long as you're okay with your name and your video being shown, just know that that might be picked up in our recording. If you're not comfortable having your name showing in the recording, there is a way to change your name by going to participants and clicking on the three dots, and you're welcome to rename yourself if you would like to. We do post our recordings, so if you like today's session, maybe you're new to our space and you're curious about other sessions we've done before, when we have the presenter's permission, and we do today, we will be posting them on our codesign.mcmaster.ca website. So you're welcome to check out our past sessions, or if you want to revisit today's, it will be posted there. You are welcome to enable captions on your side if you would like to. I'll give you some more instruction, I guess, around use of the chat, but we sound like a formal space. We're not really as formal as it sounds in this moment. You are welcome to use the chat throughout the session, and we've also built in, as you can see on the agenda, about a half hour, if not more, for some open Q&A towards the end. So Shania has asked that if you have questions, comments to share during the more formalized presentation part, you're welcome to park them in the chat, and then we'll return to them during the Q&A portion. You're also welcome during that time to unmute. We love to hear your voices. We often have a bit of dynamic dialogue happening, so we're welcoming everyone to be able to raise a virtual hand. We don't always see a physical hand. If you raise it, you don't pop to the top of our screen that way. So if you'd prefer to speak, you can go to the raise hand function down at the bottom of your screen, and that will pop you up to the top, and we can just call on people. And I talked about the rename already. So do you want to flip us to the next screen, Sinat? Okay. So we are able to create the video recording and a transcript from Zoom. We typically ask that people don't use AI. I think we do have an AI recording function happening today, I noticed come up in our participant screen, and I assume that that would help to make today's session more accessible to one or more of our participants. Shania, I don't have very much experience with the AI recordings, and I assume that that would just provide somebody with a transcript of today's session. Is that okay for you?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
Just all I ask is if you repurpose the transcript in any way to just please confirm with us and let us know.
Okay, thanks for that. I can't keep up with the technology. I appreciate that. So Shania can let us know if there's anything that might be particularly sensitive to members of our audience, but we know that because we focus on topics related to equity and co-creation, that sometimes there are topics. So if you feel like you need to follow up with the guest or with myself after the session, please feel free to do so. Or if you need to take a step away to take care of yourself during the session, please feel free to do so. And I mentioned that we like to have some dialogue, and sometimes these are contentious or issues where there might be tensions present. So we don't necessarily back away from that. We just ask that everybody is respectful in their language choices and the ideas that they're sharing for the other people who are in the room. Want to go forward? Okay, so on to the exciting part that you're all here from. I should have started with an introduction for myself. I haven't met everyone. My name is Michelle Phoenix. I'm a core team member of the Equity-Based Co-Creation Hub here at McMaster. And if it's your first time joining us, then welcome. We're an interdisciplinary group that have been established now for about 6 years. That when we focus on building capacity around equity-based co-creation. And part of that is offering this speaker series. So today, we're delighted to have Shania Bhopa here to talk about de-risking impact, lessons from co-designing sustainable health innovations. And I will read her fabulous bio. She is a multidisciplinary expert TED speaker, published children's book author, and 2X founder. She's earned her PhD in global health, focusing on community based participatory research, equity driven health interventions, and scalable solutions for marginalized communities. And she's now pursuing her MD. She's bridging scientific rigor with practical empowerment, sharing her journey with a community of over 250,000 people on social media. So we are very, very lucky to have her here in person. And I don't want to take any more of your time. So you're welcome to do a more fulsome introduction for yourself. Before we roll into that, I would like to acknowledge that McMaster University is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. I think, Sinette, we get to pass the mic at this point. All right.
Amazing. Thank you, Michelle, for the wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm so happy that you're here spending a Tuesday morning with me. I just want to preface this by saying, as I set up my share screen, I want this to be a dialogue. I don't necessarily want this to be, your standard lecture and everyone leaves the chat not knowing if they have a key formalized takeaway. So at any point, please drop your questions, your ideas, your thoughts into the chat. And I am going to do probably a bit of a shorter lecture today, so that we have ample time for discussion. And, there's very many people in the room here where I'm sure you're in similar industries, maybe you're in different industries, but it's a space that we can all learn together for the next hour and a half. And so write those questions down. And even if it's like an idea that you're like, I want advice and I want to think through this out loud, please feel free to feel like this is a safe space to do so. So, two quick questions for everyone. If you can use the chat on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your understanding of how co-design can reduce the risk of an intervention not working out? And these questions, I know we're all here from various backgrounds and industries and stages of our career. So it's my way to gauge sort of where everyone is at so I can make sure that the threads throughout the next hour are um, relatable. Okay, we have some sevens, some fours, sixes, fives, eight. Amazing. And my next question, what do you hope to learn today? And it can be something super simple. We'll wait for one or two answers before we continue. I hope to learn from all of you and answer and talk through certain questions and expand my way of thinking about co-design as well. Okay, an example of promising practices, co-design improvement work, how to reduce resistance to co-design in clinical settings. Oh, that's a topic. Trade-off between risk, new ways of being and doing. Yep. Excellent. So to get started today, our topic, co-design and CBPR as a de-risking strategy for sustainable, inclusive, and scalable interventions. Now, I talked to the team here at the Co-Design Hub a few months ago, and my logic with today's session was, I think sometimes we see co-design and we see CBPR, community-based participatory research methodology, in research in institutions. But what I find interesting about co-design and CBPR, I've personally integrated it in the community and in the startup space. And that's the beauty of today's session that I hope to touch on is co-design is a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching things, and it's not necessarily one size fits all, and it's not necessarily just confined to the academic space. A really quick example I like to start off with sometimes when I think about co-design is I find the world in very many places. For example, the individual who made this cup, they probably sat on their couch and was like, I think I know how to make the best cup with the perfect handle, the perfect size, and the perfect rim. And they might have built this cup and started to sell it. at Walmart. And let's say no one bought the cup. And the inventor is like, well, why? I think it's the most perfect cup. I think it's the best cup I've ever used. But why does no one like it? Why is no one buying it? And that's the problem is this cup wasn't co-designed with the end user in mind. It wasn't collaborated from idea all the way to execution to make sure that when that cup hits the Walmart website, that everyone is actually going to purchase the cup. And so, very simple example, but I'm sure as we go about our daily life, we can think about different things in our homes and different things in our environments that could have been co-designed to been made a little bit better. And so my background to get started on, why I'm so passionate about co-design, I believe my purpose on earth is to make the world a happier, healthier place in any way that I can, especially for young women and especially for communities who have very many barriers against them when it comes to accessing the things that they need. Um, in terms of like my academic background, I come from communications. So I actually love theory and methods in terms of human connection and what it means to be an effective communicator in all spaces. From there, I learned about knowledge translation and health communications, and I transitioned to a master's specializing in patient-physician communication. Through that, I was building a charity alongside my sister. So my little sister loves animals. She's in veterinary medicine, and growing up, we worked in shelters. And we were noticing that in very many instances, youth would bring their pets to surrender them because they didn't have the means to support their pets anymore. And we were very confused, growing up, why is this the case? And we learned that there was absolutely no organization to be supporting the well-being of youth that own animal companions because evidently we know based on data, for very many individuals facing precarious living, sometimes their animal companion is the only support system that they have. It's their love, it's their light. And how can we foster that connection as best as possible? So we co-founded the Canadian Courage Project in 2020. Up to date, we have chapters across Canada. We're currently finishing and like restarting two government-funded programs for physical activity in shelters, but also we work with the Toronto Humane Society to make sure that any youth shelter that's animal friendly has all of the resources, the vaccines, the tools to make sure that the animal companions for youth facing precarious living are healthy and well and keeping that bond as strong as possible. Uh, After my master's, I started a PhD in global health, focused on the co-design of healthy active living interventions to reduce the risk of chronic disease amongst newcomer populations between 5 and 17. And from there, I started to apply co-design in very many ways. One of those ways was I built an app for the emergency rooms, which we'll touch on. And this past year, after graduating the PhD, actually working in the field, in Malawi and thinking through intervention development, not only locally, but globally, and how, again, if you are well versed in co-design and CBPR in your practice in whatever industry it is so applicable across the board and throughout your career. And so hopefully throughout this time, you feel like you'll learn some insights that you can apply and take with you. Now, I'm going to start off. So, to preface, we're going to go through three case studies. Case study one is intervention development for newcomer populations. Case study two is co-design in community programming, and then case study three will be co-design in innovation, and so in digital tools, building them potentially clinically. But I want to start off with saying, why do we think most interventions might fail? I brought up the cup example as a good preface, but interventions for the context of this lecture can be a program. It could be a tool, it could be a medication, it could be a product, it could be a company. And my perspective is most interventions fail not because the ideas are bad, but because people that are meant to be served by said intervention are rarely involved in shaping it from the start. Too many programs are designed in boardrooms, research labs, or funding proposals without deep, ongoing engagement with the communities they aim to support. And when interventions are created for people instead of with them, they often miss the realities of daily life, cultural context. What looks effective on paper doesn't always translate into something usable, trusted, or sustainable. And I've seen how interventions struggle when they are not culturally grounded, when programs ignore language, identity, family structure structures, traditions, or community values. People are far more likely to engage when they feel seen, when they feel respected, and when they feel represented. Another major reason interventions fail is the lack of long-term investment. And, yes, in terms of funding, and we know if you are in the academic space, funding is an ongoing conversation at all times. It's tough. But outside of funding, without sustained support, local leadership, and community ownership, even the most well-designed programs will fade once that initial funding or research period ends. And so that collaborative approach to funding and keeping programs alive is really, really critical. And thinking through how they lack trust and community leadership, like I mentioned. But through my work, I've learned that some of the most effective interventions are built through partnership and are built in in spaces where people feel like they're all part of the equation. And it's a really hard thing to kind of calculate because you can use the methodology all you want, but if your space isn't warm, if it's not welcoming, if it's not making individuals feel like they're equals, that is a really big reason why interventions may fail. And I know there's very many individuals here who know what co-design is and what CBPR is, but for a quick refresher, community-based participatory research is the goal, I would say, is to produce ethical, culturally grounded, and actionable research that benefits the community. Some key features are long-term partnerships, the shared decision-making and power. Communities typically are involved in identifying priorities, designing the actual study, collecting and interpreting data together, sharing results, and marketing those results or writing up that research report together. Um, I think with CBPR, it's broad and I would argue, and I don't know if this is necessarily like methodologically promoted, but I would say that co-design is an inherent feature of CBPR. I would argue that community-based participatory research is like an umbrella, and it includes, the rigorous data collection and the data, the research writing, etc. But the co-design aspect is creative. It's a solution-focused process where end users or individuals of a program actually help design the solution or intervention together. So you're building user-centered solutions that actually work in real life. And the features of co-design, you might be hosting workshops, brainstorming sessions, visual, interactive, hands-on experiences for your end users. And so co-design, I would say, is like the method to the madness, and CBPR is the umbrella that holds it all together to make sure that you're on track and you are thinking methodically throughout your entire journey. Why I believe co-design actually de-risks any intervention that you're going to spend your heart and soul and time and funding on. From my experience, I think that people will use a program when they're involved in shaping it. And period. Like, I think that that's sometimes a blanket statement and sometimes really hard to kind of break down, well, what does that actually mean? It means that co-design is actually increasing the sustainability by building ownership rather than dependence. Instead of relying solely on external leadership to make sure a program runs, if the individuals in it are passionate, excited, and looking forward to the next session because they plan the agenda with you, then of course we're going to have enthusiasm throughout. Cultural inclusivity, I think that, again, like the cup example, in very many ways, scientists, researchers, individuals sit there and say, I think I know the solution, the best idea possible to solve this problem. But if you don't have the positionality and the lived experience as the end user, yet you might be the expert, thinking through like where your bias may lie when you are building those interventions and why cultural inclusivity is critical in that co-design process. And longevity of vision and impact. I think, there's that critique, and I've written about this in my papers that co-design it's iterative, it's tough, it's time consuming. And as teams, we might not always have the luxury of time to be sitting there and iterating on an idea and mulling it over. But if we have the grander vision of this being a longitudinal solution or this being a long-term investment, then taking an extra 2 to 3 months to really, really co-design at the beginning will save you time and money and effort in the long run. And so it's ROI positive, return on investment positive, I would say. When communities help build the solution, they also help protect it. I think that's a key feature that I've found in the examples that I will be sharing. The first example, I just want to shout out the Chancellani Research Center, the PHRI Global Health Team. SCORE is a project led by Dr. Sonia Anand and various researchers that have absolutely shaped the way I see the world, shaped the way that I approach work, and have shaped my discipline and work ethic in so many ways. And I am very, very grateful for the SCORE team. Um, the SCORE project, so one component of it that I'll be talking about today is using a community advisory board to actually co-design nature-based healthy active living interventions. And so what was a community advisory board? It was a meeting quarterly that included individuals from five different groups. One, researchers. Two, community partners, so community organizations. Three, policymakers. Four are funders. And five, the actual population in which is the end user. So newcomer families, their children, the grandparents, individuals of the household. So all members from all five of these groups would sit in a room for a few hours every quarter, and we would literally rotate around tables, working through different interventions and programs and ideas. And it's very rare to have so many representatives from five different groups all in the same room. It did take quite a few logistics, and we can talk about that later, but was very, very, very important. So when we think about score, the problem was the risk of, CVD, type 2 diabetes. It's increasing in newcomers, age 5 to 17 in low income neighborhoods. We used CBPR, the Community Advisory Board, as a vessel to co-develop the interventions that we didn't want to go in with any bias based on data, but we wanted to hear from the actual individuals on the ground. So alongside the Community Advisory Board, we had co-design sessions in between. So if every quarter there was a CAB meeting, every few weeks there was a co-design session with a smaller subset of individuals just to have a bit more one-on-one interactive time as we were again quickly iterating over the course of the 2-year design period. We had system map sessions and we had photo voice as well. Logistics, it was 2 years, quarterly CAB meetings. And the takeaway from this, operating a community advisory board with sometimes there would be 75 people in the room. Um, it was large, it was demanding, it required a lot of attention to detail and enthusiasm from leadership. But we actually allowed the end users and facilitators to be designing the interventions at the table. And one key factor I would say in a community advisory board to de-risk your intervention is we had a community partner and we had a community member as core members of our quote unquote like organizing committee. So in our organizing committee, there was myself, there was a few PIs, and then there was actually like a community member who was a mother in Riverdale and a community partner who was working in the schools as a sort of liaison between newcomer families and the school system. And so having a community member at the table designing the agenda was one of the best things we could ever do because when we would receive the feedback after a session, there were little gaps that we may have been missing. And of course, we would integrate the feedback and the knowledge, for the next session. But having that community member as part of your organizing committee is something I didn't read much in the literature, but was really critical for us in making sure that SCORE ended up being successful. So what happened in like in terms of SCORE when I left and where it is now, I was part of the 2-year design period and they got funding to expand their impact and actually copy paste the intervention that we designed in Riverdale to neighboring neighborhoods. And they're currently continuing to test those interventions in similar neighborhoods and run a cohort study. They're doing so many great things, so check them out. And a community advisory board was a big takeaway for case study number 1. Case study number 2. So the Canadian Courage Project, I mentioned it earlier, but the impact is strongest when programs are rooted in human connection, lived experience, and community trust. I, as co-founder, was not someone who resided in a shelter throughout my childhood, but I did work in shelters across my way. And so what I realized again is that humility piece. I will never be an expert in terms of what it's like to live in a shelter with your animal companion and receive programming. And so, what was critical for the Canadian Courage Project when we started was the idea of CCP emerged from a conversation with 15 collaborating partner organizations. And we all identified the gap before we, began to start. I think if anyone here is in the startup space or you're just innovating, it's really easy to think you have a great idea without realizing if it's actually a gap that you're going to fill, or are you going to be kind of just continuing something that's already been done. And so CCP has a few different programs. One is our mental health programming, so actual workshops in shelters, one-on-one. We have partnered with jack.org for various training along the way. Part two is our animal wellness booths and our resources offered to the shelters. And then three is our complementary programming. So right now we have physical activity programs that we're running. And then we also have animal ownership sort of empowerment sessions to make sure individuals who are owning the pets in shelters are understanding where the resources lie and where they can find support. Now, with community programming, very different from case study number one, because case study number one, built in the academic setting, funded by various academic funders, so CIHR, PHAC, etc. A lot more, I would say, power and strength behind the start of that intervention. Whereas when you are a small NGO, you don't have as many resources to tap on. You don't have as much funding or expertise at the table or time. And so it is a bit more scrappy when it comes to how you're co-designing. But it's my fire alarm.
We don't hear it at all on
Oh, you
our
don't?
end. If it's not too distracting on your end, you can continue, or do you need to evacuate?
I don't know. I don't think I need to evac. You know what? Give me like 1 second. Let me just check it.
Go be safe.
I'm wondering if, in the meantime, if folks have any questions that have been emerging as Shania has been speaking, um, feel free to leave them in the chat, and then we'll take it up at the end during the Q&A portion, using every opportunity we have.
Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep,
And do you hear the fire alarm?
not at all.
Wow. Okay. We're just gonna ignore it.
Are you sure?
Like
I
I'm
don't.
pretty sure it's a test.
Okay.
Okay, we're
If
fine.
you need to rethink that at any point, you just let us know and we can chat amongst ourselves until you're ready to return.
Amazing. Um,
Okay.
okay, to continue, case study number two, which is the community youth shelter. So I think what's important about the nonprofit space is, again, like I said, you don't have as many resources, you don't have as many tools at your disposal. And so how can you build co-design in a feasible way? Our problem was that we were finding when we started, our youth health programs had low engagement rates. And that was tough because we were so excited. It was COVID, and we just really wanted to make sure that individuals had the mental health tools that they needed. Um, our methodology was we had a few co-design workshops with youth and with our partners at the table before we started, and this really consisted of 3 design sessions, just three, an hour long in length over a few weeks. And from start to finish, it was really impactful to know where our gaps were in our original programming and what we needed to do to fill those gaps. And after just three, low barrier to entry sessions, our engagement improved by double. And because that engagement doubling, we were able to then expand across 10 new shelters across the city and across various places across Canada. And so this is just a comparison compared to like the big mammoth of the 74-person community advisory board in academia versus a very small, scrappy 3-session co-design session in the community. They can still have such great impact. Doesn't matter what community that you're serving. Oh my gosh, it's so interesting how this is distracting. This is like a good test to my ability to teach with the fire alarm going off. So yes, this is case study number 2. You can use co-design in small ways and in large ways and still have a meaningful impact. My third case study is TechMedic. So it is an app that we built that provides animated educational modules for patients, replacing doctors as the primary educators because we were noticing that emerge docs had such high burnout rates and individuals from newcomer backgrounds or backgrounds where they weren't necessarily well attuned to discharge instructions and programs to be following up with. It was really important that we built this tool for pediatric populations to feel welcomed. And it started with my own patient experience. I was a kid that frequented the emergency rooms and wasn't always happy with being left out of conversation. And so that ambition drove TechMedic. And so when we think about the innovation space, and again, the startup space, very similar to community organizations, is you might not necessarily have funding and you might not necessarily have the backing or the data to ground your intervention. So what can you do to make sure it's de-risked and co-designed? Our problem, again, like I said, 86% of emerge docs report burnout. There's no tool to translate diagnosis, treatment, or discharge. And there was low health literacy rates in pediatric emergency rooms. We used co-design methodology, CBPR, in 10 sessions. So we had 10 sessions with clinicians, patients, leads of procurement, children, individuals in rural, urban neighborhoods, all coming together to tackle this very, very large problem. And through those 10 sessions, we learned, from idea all the way to execution, how can we build something that's sustainable, that's interactive, that's fun, makes the experience a little bit lighter, perhaps in the emergency room, and make sure that, again, we're not stepping on any toes. It's easily integratable in emergency rooms and is not going to be a heavy lift as a startup with no funding. And so our takeaway from this is it saved upfront money building an app. We could have built 3 different versions in the span of those 10 co-design sessions, but by being slow and approaching it with a methodical way of thinking, it was really critical for us because I don't think I added the slide in here, but essentially 98% of patients who used our app after the co-design sessions felt like their experience was excellent. And physicians had a 40% time reduction in terms of the time that they were spending explaining simple concepts. And very many physicians that we were talking to would sit and draw. Sorry.
Do you want to double check that it's just a test?
Okay, they just once. They said the fire alarm was pulled, but stand by for further instruction. Okay, this was not planned for. I so apologize, everyone. Um, so in the startup innovation space, how can you save yourself time and money when it comes to building a solution? Co-design sessions can be virtual. So ours were virtual. They were 30 minutes in length, and we made sure that all participants did have a gift card to support them with their time. And so with Tech Medic, I think that this is a great example, even though the emergency room application space is very hard, very tough to break into. You can apply this concept when you're, let's say, building an art studio or a app that's consumer based or a social media blog. It doesn't matter what you're innovating in, it just matters that you're co-designing from start to finish. And so these are three examples that I think really exemplify how co-design can be implemented across the board. So in summary, based on the three different experiences, I tried to create like a 10-step recipe or the ingredients to make co-design and CBPR absolutely exceptional for your intervention, your program, and the thing that you're designing. The first is make sure your pre-session planning and relationship building includes individuals from all parties at the table. And so, like I mentioned with SCORE, we had a community member and a community partner in our agenda setting meetings and in our planning. Making sure that welcome and group agreements are signed early on. And I know this can be tedious and seem a little bit frivolous, but it really is important to set the tone and the purpose and the intention so that everyone joining those meetings is very aware of what they should be contributing, how raw and real they should be sharing, and how important it is to make sure it's a safe space for everyone. Community context and lived experience. So again, one thing that I find really tough is recruiting individuals from all backgrounds. So for example, with SCORE, it was really, really tough to include the grandparents in the neighborhoods because English might not have been their first language. And so thinking through the hurdles and how you can make it an inclusive space. You know, we had a translator on site and we had a school bus that would actually go and pick up families to ensure that they didn't have to find other means of transportation. So getting creative with how you can make the experience as safe and as welcoming and as diverse as possible. 4 is being really clear with your intention and your purpose. So previously on the slides, I had like the problem and the methodology. I think just breaking it down into 1 or 2 sentences is going to help you and your team ensure that you're never straying off course. Because one thing with co-design, and especially large groups like 74-person community advisory boards, the conversation can take different routes, and it's very easy to go off track when there's so many great ideas in the room. And so making sure your intention is clear, your purpose and your scope. Participatory idea generation. This one is more related to the design of a co-design session and thinking through, for example, having a prompt on a board and having individuals share their thoughts on a sticky note, taping it on the board, walking through the collection of ideas, and then part 2 of that is actually applying them to the intervention and working on that co-creation in person. It's more of how are you designing the sessions to make sure that they're actually interactive? Because the one thing you don't want to do with co-design is feel like you're speaking to an audience and you're telling them how to think and how to feel about a program when the goal is mutual building and that collaborative aspect. 6 is collective prioritization. So again, when you are working with groups, for example, newcomer populations, low income populations, you want to make sure that their time is well valued. And so how do you do that? In formal gift cards, in formal thank yous, in the tone and the warmth that you do have the room is really, really important. 7 is feasibility discussion. So early on, I think we know that co-design is time intensive. We know CBPR can be tough, but how can we be thinking about the long-term goal of said project? I think it's really nice to think that a co-design session could just be a one and done and a never again, when really you're committing to this grander vision, you're committing to a grounded methodology. Shared action planning, like previously said, but making sure that your agenda setting committee or the individuals planning said meetings and co-design are representative of the populations in which you're working with. Reflection and feedback. So having post and pre-session qualitative, quantitative methodologies. So whether it's a quick survey or one-on-one interviews, is a great way to iterate on the feedback that you're being presented. And finally, post-session follow-up. So one aspect of all three examples that I shared was ensuring that you're asking feedback and listening to the feedback. After every session, we would ask, whether it's head of procurement at HHS or it was a community member, how they felt about the co-design session and how we could actually make it better. Because I think oftentimes, the survey's great, but a lot of individuals might not share their raw, real feelings with you unless it's one-on-one. And so making sure you're creating that space. Overall, to conclude, three very different interventions across different industries. We went from academia to community-based organizations to innovation and digital health. All of them used very similar principles. And I would say these 10 ingredients were critical across the three industries. So at this time, I would love to open the stage to questions, to ideas, to conversation. And I want to thank you so much for your time and thank you for your patience with this random chaos that was my fire alarm.
Oh my gosh, Shania, you're such an ultimate rock star for being able that during fire alarm and your examples shared were incredible. So I'm gonna open it up to the floor. I see tons of applause coming through. Did you get the all clear?
So yeah, they said investigating currently the fire alarm.
Oh my goodness. Okay, you let us know if
Yeah.
anything changes on your end.
Whoever's watching this recording, I just want to say hello and thank you for engaging.
Gracious. All right. I'm just double checking the chat to see if any questions have come up. And I'm also reviewing the initial ideas that people were interested in learning about. The newest question to come in is from Miguel, and maybe I'll go to that one first and then I'll come to you, Louise. Um, do you want me to read them out loud for you, Shania, or would you prefer to read them?
I can read them. Sorry, the first question I see is Abigail, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Is that the one you see on your end? Okay. So Abigail, thank you so much for your question. Could you talk more about when co-design should come in? It makes sense to have it as early as possible, but is there such thing as too early that ends up derailing the mission, for a lack of better word? Excellent question. And I think it depends on, again, which industry you're in and what your end goal is. And so I would say in research, having the research question and sort of the team compromised, the community partners engaged, the community members engaged, and knowing sort of the structure for your, let's say, 2-year design period. I think that planning is really critical before you start a co-design session. Now, would I argue you can have an informal co-design session at the idea stage before you even generate the research question? Absolutely. I think it could save you a lot of time and effort. And so, for example, let's say your question broadly was, I want to build a digital blog to educate young women on their fertility. And early on, you're like, I think it'd be a good idea to have a blog. I'm not really sure, but let me engage, women in their 20s, OB-GYNs, fertility experts, and maybe an individual who has no idea what any of this means. And let's have a quick 15-minute conversation. I think that 15 minutes could give you so much insight and actually help you craft that research question, craft that direction before you create the formalized co-design process, which is, the iterative weekly, bi-weekly sessions that are 30 an hour to 2 hours in length with an actual agenda and structure. So again, depends on the industry, but I would say co-design can come at any phase and informally as well. Okay. Louise, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. This is great. It's always very validating to listen to people who are naming things that have been cornerstones in certainly with the co-design hub, but also the engagement work that I do, where there's just so much overlap. So what I wanted to ask about, it was related to your 10 steps. And I'm just so happy and so appreciative that you pointed out in the very first step that you need to have people from all the perspectives that are going to be valuable and needed, and what a difference that makes to creating, to have that team kind of the power balance, I think is what's so important. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about any of your experiences and how you achieved that kind of power balance, that sense of trust, that sense of safety in those group agreements, and how they kind of unfolded and shared decision making and things like that.
Thank you for your question. I think that one key aspect of co-design and just anything that is collaborative, choosing the right individuals to be leading the conversation is really important. And it's not necessarily the individuals with the most expertise or the most publications under their name, but sometimes it's the ones who are warm and create a space that feels welcoming. Those are nonverbals, or those are the soft skills that we often devalue sometimes in scientific research and in academia. And I think like it's changing slowly, but being really critical about who was leading those conversations was something that we talked about a lot when we were starting. And in every of the three case studies that I shared. And so when it comes to creating a space where everyone feels valued, again, I think that if you're truly, truly co-designing, everything has to be co-designed. And so from the agenda, we would have a meeting with a community member, a community partner, and myself. And it would be three of us talking equally over a Zoom or over coffee and building this agenda. And then when it came to the actual day that we were planning, we would ask the families when their best time was, and ask all the individuals. We would, when we're thinking about the flow of the event, again, that's when we tapped on the shoulder of a community member and a partner and a researcher and a policymaker, because true co-design means everything's co-design, everything's collaborative. And so that again comes with the con that we can't ignore of like it's time intensive, it's resource intensive, it's a bit slower, but it's meaningful. And if we're here to make meaning and we're here to make the world a bit of a better place, it does take intentional time.
Absolutely. Um, thank you. I have other questions, but I'll wait.
Michelle, you have a question.
Yeah, I'll return to the idea that I shared early in your ask about what people were hoping to learn. And I find in health research in particular, everybody wants innovation and fresh and new, but they also want things that are tried, tested, and true. They want you to say that it's going to work and it's going to have these impacts before you ever get the ball rolling. Um, and I wonder, because your whole talk's been about de-risking, but I find co-design actually to feel as a researcher much more risky, because you
Mm.
have to let go of so much control, and you can't say with certainty what the product or process or outcome is going to be from the initial stages. It's so emergent. Like, do you find that there's a tension between safety and risk?
Oh, yes. And this is bringing up memories about ethics proposals. And when you are writing, when you are conducting research that is so iterative, so collaborative, and so open to possibility, it is really, really tough to write down your goal, your objectives, and the expected outcomes on your REV. And that was probably my biggest learning, is the fine balance, but also sitting in the gray zone as a researcher, which you never like to feel. You don't like to feel uncertain. You don't like to feel nuanced. You like clarity and answers and solutions. And so it was, in an interesting way, a personal development a journey as well of challenging myself in the way I think about life because if you are doing a PhD, you're doing any higher education, you often are working towards building an expertise. And your goal is to build said expertise on said topic. Yet when you're doing co-design, you start to realize there's a lot that you don't know. And that humility element that you start to build in that process is one of the greatest gifts that you can take into your career because I don't believe that any of us are true experts. If we are true lifelong learners, then we are constantly seeking out information. We're constantly learning. We're constantly challenging our way of thinking. And that was one of the greatest blessings of co-design and being immersed in it for so many years in different industries is that humility piece you start to feel uncomfortable with, and then it starts to become part of you. And you start to become, honestly, a greater human, a more patient, more open-minded human. And I think we need more of that in science. And I think we need more of that when it comes to conversations, especially online. I think I see a lot of black and white conversations where it's like it's either right or wrong. We can't sit in this nuance. We can't sit in the middle. And it's also based on, I mean, I could go on a whole tangent about attention spans and how we have now trained ourselves to need answers right away and quickness. But I think that humility is a byproduct of engaging in co-design and truly deeply engaging in it. And as a researcher, see it as a blessing and see it as a gift rather than seeing it as a con to your time, your energy, or your results. Because I think a lot of the times as a researcher, your value is set in the results of your studies. I did this intervention worked, and that's why you should listen to me. When no, I think it's important that your intervention may have worked or it might have impacted X amount of people. But what's more important is, are you leading with the right intentions? And is your intention then fueled by the excitement and the love and the care from community members and partners throughout that 2-year journey? That's what's meaningful. And it's hard to quantify for sure. And we've written this in our reports that there is so many anecdotes and remarks from community partners and members that cannot be captured by a Likert scale. And how I used multiple methods in one of my papers because we started with quant and then we realized that for very many people in our study, English wasn't their first language, and so one-on-one conversations was so critical to actually capturing how they felt. And so we tacked on qualitative interviews to that study. And while, I did get the argument, why wasn't this a mixed method study from the get-go? This was poor planning. I argued back with true co-design means it's iterative and it means that you're listening. And so the fact that we listened to see that qualitative uh, insights would actually support our paper meant that this is truly co-designed. I actually think it strengthens the argument that we did a co-design approach. And that was my rebuttal to the mixed methods versus multiple methods. Sorry, Michelle, I took it on tangent, but uh,
No, I love it. I'm just nodding along, but I'm seeing hands. So I'll go to Riley and then to Honey, if that's okay.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Shania, for a great presentation today. My question is a little bit about kind of a clinical setting. So I am an RN by background, but I work more on the education side at Sick Kids now. And my experience with co-design really is in relation to involving patients and families in programs that we're designing. But I have received over the years a lot of pushback from providers because of the cons that you've kind of listed. Obviously, myself, you, many other people on this call know there's so many pros to involving people in these conversations and making it a true co-design experience. But those cons, I guess, of the extra time, the extra workload, all of those things creates a lot of pushback. So I'm curious if you have any strategies or experience that you could share about kind of related to that concept.
yeah, thank you. It's really tough. It's really tough. I get it. I would say there's 3 insights that I can share. One is approaching a clinician who, it may be resistant with compassion. And it sounds a bit strange, but I have seen firsthand how burnout and how exhaustion and how fatigue and how frustration can make a lot of individuals feel jaded towards engaging in research, period, and then especially co-design research. And so how can you speak their language in a way that benefits them? And so, for example, with Tech Medic, I remember I was really trying to engage residents in our co-design sessions, and they were like, absolutely not. They were like, no, I have negative time. And I really sat and thought about why, why are they resistant? And I wrote it down. I found the stats on burnout. I found the solutions that I was like, okay, if this works, just know you'll get 40% of your time back per patient interaction. Right now, you're sitting at 16 minutes. Let's reduce that by 40%. And I just kind of had a conversation to reason with it's an upfront investment for long-term ROI. And I think about return on investment. So that's my second point is what's the return on your investment, your team's investment, and their investment? ROI, in simple terms, return on your investment of anything. So for example, um, learning about taxes for 30 minutes is a long-term, it's ROI positive, is I would say an 8 out of 10 ROI positive because that 30-minute session is going to improve my knowledge on taxes for the rest of my life. And so when you try to speak in quantitative terms, I think it does help individuals kind of digest it. Like this is an upfront 2-hour session, but if this works, it is going to save X amount of time. It's going to save you X amount of resources. It's going to do this. And that is my mission. And that is your mission. That is your mission to solve a problem that everyone's frustrated by, and trying to make sure that they see their benefit. Because I think that sometimes reading a research proposal to an individual who's already tired and is clocked out might not get to them. So how can you restructure and reformulate it in a way that's so ROI positive? And then I would say the third, which is more of a systems issue that is another entire lecture, is we are not carving out the space for learners, for physicians to actually engage in meaningful co-design work. If HHS carved out or if HHS in the contract that you're signing as a emerge doc said you can engage in 4 hours of co-design research paid, and that's part of your contract, I think we would see a very different system. And so there's systems levels issues that we can't particularly get around, unfortunately, but how can we maybe advocate in a different way, department by department?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Okay, honey. Hello.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, thank you for the presentation. Great examples of, how co-design and participatory work can be implemented in different contexts. Is I think is kind of similar to what Riley mentioned, and I think now that, I mean, listening to your answer to that question, I think some of them can be applied to what I'm going to ask, but still I'm going to ask my question, and it's about advisory committee. You
Mhm.
talked about advisory committee, building an advisory committee is part of the community-based research. So my question was about the recruitment process and how to how to recruit, how to there are different I believe there are different steps for that, right? So how to find them, how to communicate with them, how to and again the all the cons about people are busy or different things. So yeah, how to recruit advisory committee and make it sustainable so that if it is a 2 years or 3 years of a project, how to have them sit on the advisory board and be with the project. So and considering that, I think these involvements are volunteer based, I guess. So yeah.
Excellent question. I think recruitment is an entire lecture on its own. And so I have so many stories I could share. But to boil it down to four key aspects. So aspect number one of recruitment was making sure we were very clear on the individuals we were looking to recruit and what their compensation might be. So their honorarium and the structure in which we were creating this community advisory board. So be really, really, really clear to get on the get-go. Second was you have to get really creative with different vessels. So one vessel that we had for SCORE is a lot of the parents were connected with um, kind of like they're caseworkers, systems navigators in the community. And we saw caseworkers and system navigators as like vessels of knowledge, but also a vessel to connect with the parents. And so, one recruitment idea that we had that worked was we brought together the caseworkers from various elementary schools and high schools in the area of Riverdale, and we talked them through, okay, can you schedule one-on-one meetings with parents that you think would be interested? They fit this demographic. This is what we're looking for. And I made brochures, I made pamphlets, I made like a video, I'm pretty sure, explaining what we were looking to do. And so I created different mediums that communicate the same thing, shared that with our caseworkers, and the caseworkers had one-on-one conversations with the families because they were the bond. They were the trusted resource, the trusted relationship in the community. I wasn't. And so I knew that going into this, that I would have a very difficult time recruiting a family that's never talked to me, doesn't know me, is new to Canada as of 6 months ago, and is quite hesitant about engaging in research at a big institution because, as we all know, a big fear with research is that your data or your information is going to be exploited or not used in a right way, or you're not going to be compensated for your life and your love and your energy. And so thinking about that as a researcher when you're recruiting is really critical. So that was an example of how we got creative, finding the key players, seeing how they're connected and working with them. And the third I concept of recruitment is you really have to, it's a gritty, time intensive, you know, you, you have to push 110% to get those numbers. And so how I think along the way, I feel like I set up a booth at the school, like with cookies, and I talked about our study. And, you know, if you write that in your REB ethics, like this girl's setting up a booth at a school to recruit for a study, it seems illogical. It seems time intensive. It doesn't seem like it's a good use of resources and time. But that's how I think we recruited 50 families that day. And just by having a booth and showing up face to face, because again, an email is cold. It's not always warm. And so, how can I approach it in a warm, creative way? And then the fourth thing with a recruitment is being very, very clear of what people are going to get out of it. And with co-design, I'm not sure what industry you're in, but thinking about how this is going to serve the end user and saying that every step of the way in that recruitment journey. You're engaging in this 2-year pilot. Our goal is that this intervention is absolutely exceptional so that you have a free exercise nutrition program that you can do for the next 10 years to reduce your risk of chronic disease. And that's our dream. Our dream is to make sure you're healthy. And it's sometimes I find researchers, and this was taught to me and I had to kind of unlearn it, is you don't always say the quiet parts out loud because you think that people assume what you mean. And as a researcher, you're in this bubble with other researchers as an echo chamber. Whereas an individual who's a newcomer to Canada wants to hear that you deeply, deeply care about their health and well-being. And even just that one sentence can change their entire frame of reference and image of you. And it again comes back to that humility and that like vulnerability. Um, this is another side tangent, but Brene Brown does a lot of vulnerability research out of Texas. She has a book called Atlas of the Heart. It is one of the best books ever. I think every human being, researcher, leadership should be reading it. It goes through the 50 human emotions, and it's like a mix of a literature review and storytelling and tactic. And I think when you're recruiting, thinking about those human emotions. Thinking about the end users and how they're feeling, what their concerns are, what their fears are, and making sure that you're addressing that. Because it's so easy to write a 10-step proposal and email it off and hope that it reaches the right person. But that rawness, that grittiness, that like face-to-face time can really make the difference. Thank you. Genevieve, you are muted. Love your background.
Thank you. I'm not actually in or San Francisco. Thank you so much for the refreshing talk and for your creative spirit. This was very interesting presentation. I wanted to know more about when you were showing your 10 key tips. There was number 2 in the group agreements. And I wanted to know more what kind of ingredients in that specific group agreement you would put. And do you talk about have you had projects where you had to talk about intellectual property? Because if you're working with technologies or researchers, how does that come up and how have you navigated that? So would love
Yeah.
to hear you.
Excellent question. So I will say a group agreement for every 3 of my case studies was very different. So for example, in research, our group agreement included, you know, uh, a lot of emphasis on creating a safe space, communication, tone, and we had different group agreements between like leadership and then with our community or individuals in the cab. So we had 2 group agreements because internally, I think as a team, you need to align on the vision, the mission, and the tactful strategies that you'll be using in communication and in, creating a safe space. That group of agreements critical. Then the second group agreement with the individuals engaged in a 75 to 100-person community advisory board included things like, yes, not sharing information from others' experiences, just out of protection of people really, really vulnerable at a community advisory board, being aware of what that means and how that safety is really important. I don't necessarily think, and I could be wrong, but we didn't necessarily have an IP section of case study number 1, so for the community intervention, but we had more of a everyone's knowledge sharing. Please respect that this knowledge is maintained within the community advisory board. Versus when I built TechMedic, the app in emergency rooms, we had a separate NDA for everyone in that co-design session because with technology, with app building, and again, startup spaces, and like let's say when I did pitch to investors, an investor doesn't want to know that your IP could be anywhere and people could essentially take it. And co-design is actually, I would say, risky when you're pitching to an investor because they're like, "What do you mean? People have shared their ideas with you. Do you own this? Is this yours?" And so separate NDAs was critical for TechMedic. And also, again, it goes back to the humility element of why an NDA is important, right? Like telling your end user, let's say it's your customer on a call and you're building an app for fertility, let's say, and you're like, listen, I've poured my heart and soul into this, and I just want to protect the work that my team has done and ensure that it's not shared and distorted. And I trust you, and I trust you for being part of this, and I value your opinion. And because sometimes NDAs can sound scary, and people are really like jarred with, well, what do you mean? But again, practicing that humility and that like vulnerability is really important.
Thank you.
Of course. Are there any other ideas or questions, or is anyone working on a project that they might just want to share and like talk through? I'm more than happy.
There was a question asked earlier. Somebody was interested in learning about the Co-Design Hub, and I am happy to share a little bit about that if there's no other questions that I'm seeing for you, Shania. It's been such an engaging conversation, and your 3 cases made all the principles and practices that you shared really applicable to a whole variety of different projects and spaces that people might be engaging in. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for being excited about co-design and excited to learn about it. I think that if you implement it and are thoughtful with your implementation, it could change so many things, change the world in a lot of ways.
I think you are changing the world. So it was so nice to get like a front seat to all of the incredible work that you're doing. I will take a minute to share a little bit about our co-design hub. I was trying to scroll back to see if the person who asked about that is still in line or online. I'm just going to cross my fingers that you are. Um, so our group is interdisciplinary, and we have several members of our core team online today. Our two leads of the hub are Dr. Gillian Mulville from the DeGroote School of Business and Dr. Sandra Mull from the School of Rehabilitation Science. And then we have other members online today from engineering, from social science. I'm from School of Rehabilitation Science, and we're always welcoming new members. So feel free. Sinat will share at the end how you can stay linked in with us if you're interested in our events or joining other opportunities to connect, such as our student network that's just emerging. We're happy to have you. Part of our reason for being is to build capacity in doing equity-based co-creation. And we do that along a number of fronts. Some of it is scholarship into what are practices and principles in doing equity-based co-creation. So Shania gave some great examples of some of the practices. I loved your top 10 kind of ideas for structuring that. There's lots of design theories out there, and our group builds from all of that work in taking specifically a look at how do we engage people who are often excluded from these practices, and lots of great conversation about that today and how to make it more of an inclusive process. So that's one branch, is to really do some scholarship into those methods and to be able to share that. Say another is to support teams and students directly on their projects. So we've had student scholarships available in the past to um, to support their development of their own co-creation projects. So those tended to be one-year projects, and we've had our students who were engaged in those present via our hub before. So lots of incredible, diverse work happening in that space. And they're able to support one another along that learning journey as well, because like Shania said, there's lots of gray area, there's lots of bumps in the road, there's lots of need for iteration. You're almost always up against something unexpected. So it's helpful to have people there who can help to overcome some of those twists and turns as they arise. And I would say this is another way that we're trying to share information broadly, not just through our speaker series. We've held workshops in the past, we hold grant consultations, and we have in the past, and hopefully this year we'll have a symposium that's in person. Louise, I know you were able to join us at our last one, where we feature some of our own work, lots of our community members' work, and really a chance to mix and mingle and network. So if you're curious about any of that, that's going to share our website in the upcoming slide, if my memory serves. And you're always welcome to reach out to us if you'd like to connect or hear more. Sinat, is it a good time to share? Oh, I am missing some messages at the end. Let me just peek to make sure that there are no questions. Oh, there was one about, I think this is for you, Shania, if I can go back to it. Do you have experience working with private labs with MedTech? Do you see that one? It's from an iPhone.
I see that question. I think this is a very broad question. So I think I need a little bit more information on sort of what type of med tech, but from my experience, I think that innovation hubs are really, really, really helpful. So like the Forge I've worked through, and the skills that they teach you and sort of kind of like I became an angel investor because of the skill set I built in critically analyzing various startups and their financial projections, et cetera. And so that was a skill that I never thought I'd learn through an innovation hub. When it comes to private labs, let's say I'm going to assume that your medtech tool or project is you want to test it or you want to maybe develop some data and some research, and so you're working with a private lab to do so. I think it's very tricky if I just don't have as much information as I would like to answer this question, but I think it's important to, yes, collaborate with private labs. Just know that there can always be bias in that data. So let's say that you are an industry funded study. Um, as a reader, I already kind of have my ears perked up to read your results and see where the bias may land. So just keep that in mind if you are, an industry sponsored sort of research project for a private company or startup.
Hi guys, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Vicky. What an honor to be on this call. It is so exciting and such a huge, it just ignites my passions, especially now getting into tech and AI with medicine. So there's this laboratory called True Diagnostics, and they have huge genetic studies with Yale University to study your biological age. So with those tech, it'd be nice to incorporate a tech company that I want to start up and help do some case studies and advance some things. So that's just one of the laboratories, and they're funded by researchers, PhD scholars, um, and college graduates. So it's so full of purpose, and it serves public safety. So, for example, there's two universities here, University of Miami and FIU. They help shape public safety here in South Florida. So I really want to be part of those um, projects for myself. And it's my first time. I've never done anything like this before. So it'd be nice to kind of understand how to present this stuff, how to, not face scarcity. And, not many people are doing this as well. So I really want to make sure that what I'm doing is making sense to these laboratories, but also making sure it's regulated, it's compliant, and it's just really get more experience. This is something completely brand new for me. So yeah, just being part of these conversations is so awesome to really discover and kind of finding the risk management when it comes to innovation, especially with laboratories. There's so many questions and compliance. So it's very heavily compliant.
Yeah,
Thanks so
thank you
much.
so much. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you for introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about your context. And you're welcome to join any of these sessions. The upcoming dates are usually on our website. And if you've joined our newsletter, they should get mailed to you. I did see in the chat that there seems to be a little glitch in newsletter sign up. So thanks for that comment. I think it was Annalisa. So we will double check and just let us know if you have any issues with being able to subscribe to our mailing list.
I did have one more question. So you mentioned that you guys kind of help a little bit with granting, business grants. Is that right?
Yeah, we have tended to do more on the side of research grants.
Research
I don't
grants.
know if that's
Okay.
what you're thinking of for business grants, but if you want to reach out to us directly, we were just approved as a core research platform, and part of our mission is to support people in doing equity-focused co-design research. So feel free to shoot us an email if there's something in particular you'd like to chat about.
Awesome. Thank you.
Uh, I'm trying to keep up on the moving chat. I think that Sinet has kindly put a link to, if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter or our student network, you're welcome to join that way. There was also a great reminder that if anyone's looking to develop their skills in equity-based co-creation, we've now launched a micro-credential that's open to students, but not only students, other researchers or community members, and it's self-paced, available online. So you're welcome to check out our website if that sounds like something that might be of interest to you. And I think that there is a question from Sarah. What advice
Yeah,
would you give someone wanting to pivot into public health and getting involved with public health projects beyond the immediate clinical setting?
excellent question. So, how can I answer this? I would say there's three things that come to mind when I think of this question. The first is I was a communications major, so I had no connection to healthcare at all. And early on, I had to learn how to, you know, do some free work, volunteer for various research projects, get my feet wet in ways that I could be helpful to people that I looked up to. I think it was really tough for me. I didn't come from a family where I didn't have really like connections in healthcare and beyond, in academia especially. So I kind of had to make those on my own. Um, so I would say don't be afraid to do some heavy lifting sometimes when it comes to pivoting, connecting with people and asking, let's say Michelle was doing research in AI that I was fascinated by, and I would just reach out to Michelle and say, I'm fascinated by your research. Is there anything I can help with? I have a few extra hours per week and I'm more than willing. My skills in data collection are transferable and my skills in knowledge translation are transferable. And kind of just start there. And as you plant those seeds, they start to open up into vessels. And you'll see that over time, you'll start to build a network and build confidence, I think, in your pivot to public health as well. And don't be afraid to say what you don't know. I think that that was one thing I learned really early is I would, even now, I'll say, listen, I haven't taken chemistry since grade 10. And I am learning, we're on urology right now. And so I'm learning that a lot of chemistry. And uh, I say that openly. And I think that vulnerability can get you really far when it comes to people knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are. I would also argue one thing that I don't think we talk enough about is your differentiators when you are in a pivot. So even though you may be pivoting to, let's say, a different industry, that doesn't mean that your differentiators evaporate. So let's say your skill in being a connector. You have to be a connector when you're working in clinical research. You have to connect well with patients, you have to connect well one-on-one in focus groups, etc. And so that skill set is 100% a differentiator that you have crafted for yourself and is now going to carry you into your pivot as well and actually amplify whatever team it is that you join or whatever project that you start. So get really clear on like three things. One is what extra time do you have to kind of get your feet wet and volunteer your time with various people you might look up to. Two is understand what your differentiators are and how they're going to transfer to the pivot. And then three is practicing that vulnerability and saying what you don't know, but saying what you're so excited to learn.
Thank you so
She'll
much.
Of course.
be a stellar life coach. I think that there are no more remaining questions in the chat, but don't let me limit you if you're typing away right now. Feel free to go ahead. I just thought I would do a last call out. And of course, you're welcome to unmute if you'd prefer just to ask anything out loud. Otherwise, we're on our last 4 minutes here. Sinat, was there any other announcements from our end?
Yes, thank you firstly, Shania, for an amazing presentation. This was really nice to hear, and the conversation has been so lively. So thank you again. Yes, I do have some final slides that I will just share. So yes, folks have been asking about the newsletter, how they can join. So here are some QR codes, as well as the links have been posted in the chat. We have two mailing lists. So there's a general mailing list where you'll be part of our large network of 600 plus folks who have stayed engaged for different opportunities. And so you can join that to be notified of when the next webinar will be coming up. If you're a student at any level, if you're interested in joining our new student network, there's a separate QR code for that. So that is a more new and emergent initiative that we started last year. And lots of events are on its way in the winter term. We do have a new publication produced by members of our team, including Jillian Mulvale and Sandra Mall, who are the co-directors of the EQCC Hub. And so if you're interested, here's a QR code to read more. The title is Understanding Lived Experience-Driven Co-Production in Health and Social Services, the Sowing and Growing Model. This is a model that the team created to describe the process of using co-production to address challenges related to mental health, I believe, and other health conditions faced by communities in 3 different locations, and seeing how those cases or those projects have been adapted to multiple sites. So you explore the process of implementation and diffusion across those different contexts. So for further investigation, if you're interested, please review this piece of literature that's been contributed recently. And as always, thank you so much, and please share your feedback with us. This is a survey that takes 1 to 2 minutes to complete, letting us know what you liked about the session, what we can improve for next time. And please stay engaged. These sessions run monthly, and so new topics will be released. And hopefully we should have one for February as well, but that will be announced through the newsletter and our LinkedIn social media. So that's all from me. I'll stop share, or I'll leave it at this slide, I guess, as we wrap up. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Sinette. And especially huge thank you to you, Shania. It was so informative and I think exciting for people to see these like really grounded examples, and it makes it feel real, so different than reading an article about existing theories or methods. And of course your work is so powerful in what you've been able to achieve. So thanks for inspiring us all today.
Thank you. I feel inspired with everyone here and their passion and their purpose. And if you have any questions, I'll share my email in the chat maybe, and feel free to let me know. I share everything also on social media. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Oh, I think I sent that one. Um, and like have a beautiful rest of your week. It's like quite sunny if you are in Ontario right now.
It's gorgeous. Okay, thanks everyone for joining today. So nice to see you. Maybe we'll wrap up here.